Recording. Let's say it's recording somewhere. Okay, it is. This is Mary Conley on May 11th. I'm getting a little settee, like love seat coming. This is a 3-mile walk, and I figured this would be a good time to do my video if it doesn't screw up. Okay, let's go back to June 5th, 1967. I had a friend I met when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I knew her from the time I was a playmate from like 6 to 16, basically. So she had moved into this white house with black shutters, which it's Tudor, but it was concrete. Her mom was very flamboyant, but she was sitting outside, and there were ragweed, what do you call those little yellow buttercups? Because the yard hadn't been mowed recently, and she was playing, and I said, Kathleen was my little friend, was 3 or 4, and we were like 6, and I met Debbie Hogue. And she had Mexican jumping beans because they had come from Corpus Christi, Texas. Her father worked for the space program and apparently was a commander because her mom, Jean, would constantly say, my father was a chief petty officer, ADC, and Mr. Davis was some kind of chief petty officer with electrical knowledge. And they worked at the NAS eventually and retired from NAS. My dad joined the Navy in 1936 when he was young during the Depression and got out in 59, and then he immediately went, or after some hoops, he went to the Naval Air Station in Jacksonville and worked on aircraft. Anyway, so I met Debbie, and then when we were entering 8th grade, it was summertime, and I believe May had been like Wednesday, May 31st is Memorial Day, and then we had Thursday and Friday, and then around the 5th, we were going to go to summer band. I don't think this one, I had been to majorettes, twirling. We had been to choir at Cedar Hills Church. First, let me say, one time I was very mean. My dad was a divorcee. He had been married when he was very young, and I have a half-sister who was 12 years older than me. So we never really matched up because, like, when I was 10, she was already, 22? So, it wasn't a good match. A couple times she did come up to Jacksonville, and she was bipolar also, but she got a master's in education and taught school for 30 years in Clay County. She's a nice person, but people that have manic depression, they tend to self-medicate, and she drank until she got cirrhosis of the liver and died within the last 5 or 6 years, just like my brother with drinking issues. I don't drink personally. I mean, in the course of a year, if there's a river run, I say, okay, or I ran on the beaches for 5 miles, I let myself have a beer. If I go to a Jaguar game, I get like a Coors Light. Anyway, in a year, some years nothing, And I used to be at like holidays, I get a bottle of Manischewitz blackberry wine or something, supposedly good for your something or other, but I don't think any of it's good for you anyway. Anyway, so it's summer, just about like this, and we're up there. I hope this works. So we go up to summer band. I meet at her house because I was a diminutive person in the relationship. I was like the weirdo, the young. I was also kind of a tomboy, and I also was very young for my age. I was 12.9, but I had 2 blocks of friends. One group of friends were on Aldington, and that would be Kathleen, occasionally Russell and Dwayne Mays, Sylvia. And Sylvia the Mocks lived diagonally across from Debbie. And since Debbie went into nursing, I think Sylvia, Cheryl, and Kathy all went into some like nursing too eventually, or similar things. And they were 3 girls. Debbie's household was Debbie, Vicky, and Jeannie. Going back to 67, we'd walk up there. And I wasn't all that enthralled with it. I'd seen the Benny Goodman movie. I said, well, maybe I can do clarinet. So my mom got a clarinet, and I imagine she got it at a pawn shop because it was an old Bundy clarinet. Had a purple velvet interior. And I was more excited about summer vacation. Like I said, there were 2 blocks. So on my block, I could play with Mike and Jean, Stoney, Janice, Billy, Karen, and the people on my block, even Sharon Capel, whose father was a preacher. Her father was a preacher, worked for the Southern Law Center, and eventually they moved to Lake City. And I actually went to Lake City a time or two, and Sharon came up here a time or two. Anyway, so I had friends. If things got too, let's do the makeup, and Jeannie's become pregnant, and Miss Sexton's talking about things off toward, she was manic depressant. I could simply say, oh no, this is beyond my sensibility at this point, so let me go back and play kickball with Mike and Jean, or knock 'em sock 'em, or rock 'em sock 'em, or one of the toys they had. They had an aquarium, they had Wagner encyclopedias, Funk and Wagner. So we look at every page of the encyclopedia. We watch some guy, the original guy that would do animals. Remember the original animal guy before the guy in Australia? Before him, there was another guy. And we watched that in Mike's room, and he wanted it painted black and get a black light. And Mrs. Eccles let him do that, but I tell you what, I wouldn't want a black room. But anyway, he had red hair, Mike and Jean, Stoney, and Silly Putty, and Kickball, and Craig even a little bit, but he was way out. There were 2 generations of kids, too. There were the ones born in the 40s, and then the ones born in the 50s, and they were a good 8 to 10 years apart. So we go up to the band practice, and I imagine it was something like 9 to 12. So we're leaving out, walking. We had to walk home, we had to walk back, and Debbie stopped at the bleachers in front of Jeb Stewart. And they were facing outward oddly. They weren't facing inward, or she was turned oddly. And she was wearing Wrangler cutoff and a peasant top. And I think sandals possibly. And her mom had she had a bob. And her mom had let her cut her hair, dye it kind of sienna. When it was not, naturally, it was like a honey colored, but it was darker. Anyway, that summer, she was doing something with her hands. I think she had seen a movie or a drama or something, and she was doing this. And I said, it was a summer of love. Of course, we had tween magazines and different things. And my parents watched the news every night. So I said, let me try to hitchhike. So I went about like over there, just across here. Let's say this is the baseball area. Then I went like over there on this curve in the road. And people were leaving the school. Apparently, it shut down between 12 and 1. It was over. It was just for summer, So we're supposed to be going home. And she's lollygagging. So I went over there, and I stuck my thumb out because I had seen that people were hitchhiking all over. My dad talked about when he went to school, they'd catch a ride in the back of a truck and stuff up in Mississippi and all this. So I said, well, maybe one of the older boys from the neighborhood, Greg Powers, Craig Fagan, the Dione boys. The school had previously been the high school. A few years before it had been the high school, and now it was a junior high. It was a junior high school. But it had been Forest High School, and now it was Jeb Stewart. So that's where we went in 8th grade. We were getting ready to go into 8th grade. I'm sticking my thumb out, and then this green car goes by. It was olive green with fishtails, and the Mox had won a car from his auto shop. He had filled in all these Pennzoil things and put his name over and over. Any spare time he had, he'd fill in these forms, and he lucked out and got the Oldsmobile or whatever it was. And it kind of had fishtails, and I saw it go by, and I thought, Miss Maka's going to get really mad if she sees we're out here piddling around. And I was just playing. I didn't mean to really get a ride unless it was someone we knew. But, gas. Anyway, it went by around the corner, and I said, uh-oh, Miss Ann Mock's not going to like that, so let me go ahead and go back. Right as I was getting ready to step off the curve and go back, this bright red Volkswagen goes by. And it had chrome bumpers, and and the dust went up, and the red clay, and then he's talking to Debbie. And I thought, well, he must have saw Debbie first or something, because I don't know where he came from. I don't know if he came from the pine trees or if he came off the road, but there he was. And I said, hey, naked, because he wasn't wearing a shirt. And then I'm standing in the rear of the car. As I walked across to see it, it appeared to be black. The tag appeared to be a white tag with black lettering. But I looked at the Washington State tags, and they're dark green. That year was so dark that from a distance it could appear to be black. See that green trash can? Look at the center of it. See? The center looks black, right? But the exterior is green. So it was kind of like my eyes aren't that great anyway. So anyway, I walk across, and I'm standing to the rear of the vehicle. I think I stood to the right side some of the time, the left side and the rear back. And anyway, they're talking and talking. I couldn't hear what they were saying. It was like she was flirting with the guy, and I'm thinking, damn, he's 20, Debbie, 20. I always thought he was 20 to 22, the guy. And he had a mole somewhere on his back of the neck, too. Maybe on the side, I don't remember, a big mole, like a birthmark or something. Anyway, so then she said, get in. I said, no, Debbie, it's just pretend. We're just pretending. So she's messing with his latch, and I said, no. So anyway, she's going to get in, and you can't let your friend I'm 12 years, 9 months. She's 12 years, 7 months. Her birthday's in November, mine is in September. So anyway, she's going to get in. So I said, okay. I looked at him. He looked pretty GQ looking. His hair was cut neatly. And I got in the back. The seat, there was a latch, a little white latch. It looked like a guitar pick kind of looking thing. And she pulled it forward, and I got in the back. And I said, there's books back here. And he said, just move the books. Just move the books, I said, oh, okay. There was a golf shirt on the floor. And my dad didn't wear golf shirts. He used old Navy shirts till they fell apart, T-shirts. And if they were to wear something cool like that, mostly they wore just dress shirts or T-shirts or his Navy coveralls, whatever. Johnny also. I don't remember any kind of like ribbed golf shirts, no. My dad wasn't a golfer to begin with. So it was a pale yellow golf shirt, and it had a ribbed collar, and it had some kind of emblem over one of the chests. I remember that. It was sort of circular, if I remember. So you can't remember 56 years, but I moved it out of the way. And some of the books, one of the books looked like a black leather book. At first I thought, oh, a Bible. And I'm paging through it, and it was like some kind of hieroglyphics to me. It was like English in one section, and then something like Arabic or something on the other side. I couldn't read it, either Russian. Somebody said it might be Chinese. It might have been. I don't know. There were like little figures of slashes and stuff. I thought it was Arabic looking, but I couldn't read it. And I said, oh, what is this? Put it aside. Another one was a colorful book with somebody standing like in water with a net or something. I mean, it was blue and yellows come to mind. We were going way back in history, right? And I moved these things out of the way. It's a very tight squeeze in this little car. The seats did not have headrests. I don't remember anything about seat belts. I got in. I don't remember a radio. It seemed like there was a silver bar that went across the front of the dashboard. It was curved. Everything was curved. I'd never been in a Volkswagen that I know of. Maybe the Capellas. The Capellas did have a Volkswagen. So let me think. That was it. And then I opened my clarinet case. It must have been trafficky because people were leaving the school. So, always keep your head on a swivel. Anyway, people were leaving the school. And then he got to Lamoille, and he turned left. The other would have led to Confederate Point area, but we didn't go that way. We turned left. And then we're coming up, and there was always this cow field over there. And it was owned by the Towers Hardware people. And I said, he pulled a silver revolver. I think there was on the dashboard, which seemed to be tan, but I don't know why they had such an odd mixture of cars. The car was bright red and had chrome bumpers. And then he pulled a revolver from somewhere, and it was a pretty long revolver. And he pointed it to the ceiling, and then his eyes did something odd. And it was like his eyebrow then, he'd been a nice looking guy, but now all of a sudden he looked like, his eyebrow was like caveman. It just went completely across his forehead. And I said, what is your name? And he said, Theodore. And I said, Theodore? Because it, was so pretentious. And then I said, well, what is your last name? And he said, Bundy. And I said, your name is Bundy like my clarinet, and your gun is silver like Debbie's flute. And then I said, if you're looking for girls, you ought to go up to the high school. Because remember, there was a symbiotic relationship between that junior high and the high school. They were actually one and the same, but they had split off. So I said, well, if you're looking for girls, you need to go. Because I thought, well, what is wrong with this man? I said, you ought to meet Debbie's sisters. They're beautiful and already out on their own. They're so pretty. And then I said, Debbie's father's an admiral. Now, luckily, Mrs. Sexton always, well, Debbie's mom later became Mrs. Sexton, but Mrs. Hogue always said her husband was a CO, CO1, CO2, CO3, whatever. He was apparently a commander working at NASA, which was Cape Canaveral at the time. I met her father a couple times. He had made chicken cacciatore for us. It was the best tasting stuff. He talked about the Greek islands where he had been one time. And another time he was in Jean's bedroom and he had a piece of gray material and he said it was Teflon. And he said the Teflon would be used on the spacesuits. He was a nice looking man. If you ever watched that show In the Middle or the Waltons, both of those actors look kind of like he looked in my mind. Open-faced, Dutch-looking, hair swagged across his forehead. But Mr. and Mrs. Hogue were in the process always getting a divorce this, divorce that. So she had to have separate maintenance and probably child support or something. So they were actually divorced. He wasn't in the picture, but I said, oh, Debbie's father's an admiral. Well, I didn't know there was only 5 or 6 admirals in the whole of the country. So it was very odd. And I think that threw him for a loop. And I think he decided, the reason I think he was here was there were several situations. One, he had gone to Puget University on a scholarship too, by the way. It wasn't just a Washington scholarship or the Stanford College scholarship. He also had a scholarship to his original college. He graduated in 1965 and did about a year there, and then in March he withdrew. That struck me odd because he had met this girl and is supposed to be madly in love with her, and he drops out of school when he's trying to impress her. Oh, I dropped out. That can't be very impressive. But anyway, he's going to go to Washington, University of Washington. I don't know I read this. I don't know this. But the reason I think he ended up here is he had one family and friends would say, oh, you've got a scholarship to Stanford to do an intensive English. And it was a government scholarship. Maybe his stepfather said, you can get a government scholarship. It was because of Sputnik. They had scholarship called the Defense Scholarship, and it was for Russian and Chinese languages, certain math courses, certain science courses. Well, he was taking intense Chinese, so he got a full scholarship to Stanford for 8 weeks, a summer course. And the thing was, that includes room and board. Also, later in my research, it turns out his girlfriend at the time, Diane Jean Edwards, which is strange because Debbie's middle name is Diane, and her mom and her sister were Jean and Jeannie. So there again. And Jeannie was beautiful. The daughter at the time had fairly long black hair, very petite, looked like a young cross between Audrey Hepburn and Liz Taylor. The mom was a doppelganger for Elizabeth Taylor. And her mom was bipolar and were manic depressant and had electric shock therapy and had worked. Oh, I want to take an aside real quick. I was so mean to Debbie, or jealous. I was jealous of the whole situation because they were so mature and, all this makeup everywhere, fancy clothes, and I'm just wearing stuff my mom picks up at the commissary or somewhere. Kmart, they got a Kmart. She was half Pick and Save, maybe. That's where them boys got them. Boys didn't wear shorts, by the way. Boys did not wear shorts. They wore, if they had a pair of shorts, sometimes they were just swim trucks. They picked up at Pick and Save, like white swim trucks became their summer shorts, okay? Or Atlantic Mills, Mike and Jean, Atlantic Mills, they had shorts. And gym outfits were bizarre back then. They were like nylon, you know. Anyway, sort of like soccer pants more than like running track. You know, like they didn't look like running shorts. They looked more like soccer pants, you know. Anyway, that's what he was wearing. He was wearing tan khaki shorts. And I thought, well, is he a coach? And then I thought, well, there's a basketball hoop by the pine tree. So I thought, well, maybe he's an older guy and he just played some what they call pickup basketball, 8 or something. You know, maybe he just came and was playing basketball. After I set the shirt down and the gun displayed, there was an odor in the car that smelled like, have you ever smelled a hobo, like at a bus station or somewhere? It smelled like sweet, crappy hobo stink. So anyway, he came back and I started talking. I just talked and I don't know what I talked about. Debbie, who had been her mouth was zipped shut. When she saw that gun, she looked straight forward and her mouth was shut. I said, we got to bring him back from wherever the hell psychologically he's gone. We need to bring him back. So we just talked. I talked about my mom. I talked about Miss, you know, all of it. How pretty Jeannie and Vicki were. I don't know beyond the conversation. I know I said those things. And he came back, and then Debbie sort of got into it too, because we needed to bring him back to normal. And she must have talked to him, and we got off at Harlow and Landing at the gas station there. So anyway, I was mean to Debbie. It was around 10 or 11, and we were getting ready to go on summer vacation. Usually Memphis, you know, Faulkner, Ecru, Mississippi, Ripley, or Daytona for 2 weeks at Rip Van Winkle. My mom would get this hotel room that actually had like a kitchenette so we could have meals, you know, within. We'd go to Daytona for a week sometimes, or we'd visit relatives in Faulkner, Ripley, Memphis, and Tupelo kind of area, Ecru, Mississippi. Or we'd go to Philadelphia on rare occasions and see Grandmom and Grandpa Stelzer. So that was coming up. This kind of stuff coming up. And my dad spent a day. He took these lawnmower wheels. Me and Debbie were sitting there playing and talking and stuff. And he's building us a go-kart. And I mean a real go-kart. We had rope, which you could pull. The front hinge was like this. And he put the wheels on there. And he had a seat. Maybe even a little back bumper thing so you wouldn't fall off the back. It was made out of various leftover wood. But he had the wheels on, and he had this thing, it must have come off an old lawnmower too, where you could actually steer it. You could pull it this way or pull it that way with the rope. And he got this whole thing put together. I said, take it apart, Dad, because they mentioned that we're going to be going out of town. And I'm sitting there thinking, you built this thing for Debbie, not me. You built this thing. And I said, and when we come back, it's going to be tore up. So I made him take it apart. That was a mean little kid, take it apart, because I got so jealous in my heart. I didn't want Debbie to have the go-kart while we were out of town. So I didn't even think we used it. I made him take it apart. That's a mean little kid. And I don't know what Debbie's life was like. Her daddy wasn't in the picture. So this is an aside. See how mean I could be? I was a little mean little thing. But I thought, no, she's always front and forward, and I'll let her be that way. But my dad spent a day building this go-kart. No, take it apart. So that's a mean little kid. But anyway, I'm going to let this be part 1, and I will give you the next part in a few minutes.